The person you think you are isn't who you actually are. It's a constructed image, a false self you've built to survive in the world. And Carl Jung discovered that most people spend their entire lives defending this false image, never realizing they're betraying their actual self in the process. You hate certain things about yourself. You're ashamed of parts of your personality. You constantly try to improve, fix, or transcend who you are. But Jung would say, the problem isn't who you are. The problem is that you're seeing yourself through the ego's distorted lens, and that distorted self-perception is creating all your suffering. Here's what's shocking. You can't change who you fundamentally are, but you can completely change how you see yourself. And when you change how you see yourself, everything changes. Your relationships transform. Your purpose becomes clear. Your suffering decreases. Not because you became someone different, but because you stopped trying to be someone you're not. I'm about to reveal Jung's process for fundamentally changing how you see yourself, and why this shift in self-perception is the foundation of what he called individuation. This isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about seeing yourself as you actually are for the first time. Here's what Jung understood that most self-help completely misses. You don't have a self-improvement problem. You have a self-perception problem. You're not seeing yourself accurately. You're seeing yourself through layers of conditioning, judgment, shame, and ego defense. And that distorted perception is making you hate who you are. From childhood, you learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which weren't. When you expressed certain qualities, you were rewarded. When you expressed other qualities, you were punished, rejected, or shamed. So you did what every child does. You pushed the unacceptable parts into the unconscious shadow and built a persona, a false self, made only of the acceptable parts. Now you identify with the persona. You think the persona is who you are, but it's not. It's who you learn to pretend to be to avoid rejection. And underneath the persona is your actual self, containing all the qualities you rejected, all the potential you suppressed, all the authenticity you buried to survive. The tragedy is this. You're trying to improve the persona. You're working to make the false self better, stronger, more successful, more lovable. But no matter how much you improve it, you still feel empty, inauthentic, incomplete, because the persona isn't you, and improving what isn't you will never create fulfillment. Jung discovered real transformation doesn't come from improving how you see yourself. It comes from fundamentally changing what you see when you look at yourself. It means withdrawing identification from the false persona and recognizing your actual self, which includes everything you've been rejecting as not me. This is terrifying, because your actual self includes qualities you've spent your whole life believing you shouldn't have. It includes your shadow, your darkness, your selfishness, your aggression, your unacceptable desires. Everything you've labeled as bad me that must be fixed or eliminated. But Jung would say, those rejected parts aren't problems to fix. They're parts of your wholeness waiting to be integrated. And until you change how you see them, until you stop seeing them as defects and start seeing them as essential aspects of who you are, you'll never see yourself accurately. What follows is Jung's process for fundamentally changing how you see yourself, not by becoming someone different, but by seeing who you actually are, without the distortion of ego judgment. The first step in changing how you see yourself is recognizing that the person you think you are is a construction, not reality. Jung called this the persona, the social mask you wear, the identity you present to the world, the version of yourself you've come to believe is your true self. But it's not. It's a survival mechanism you built in childhood that you now mistake for your identity. Your persona was created through a simple process. You expressed something and you observed the reaction. When you were emotional and got punished, you learned, showing emotion is bad. I shouldn't be emotional. When you were assertive and got rejected, you learned assertiveness is wrong. I should be agreeable. When you were selfish and got shamed, you learned selfishness is unacceptable. I should always put others first. So, you built a persona that only contains the acceptable qualities. You became the person who's always calm, always agreeable, always selfless. And you pushed the unacceptable qualities, emotion, assertiveness, selfishness, into the unconscious shadow where you couldn't see them anymore. Now you identify with the persona completely. When someone asks who you are, you describe the persona. I'm a calm person. I'm easygoing. I'm a helper. You've completely forgotten that you constructed this identity. You think it's who you naturally are. But Jung discovered, the persona is preventing you from seeing your actual self. Because your actual self includes all the qualities the persona excludes. You're not just calm, you're also emotional. You're not just agreeable, you're also aggressive. You're not just selfless, you're also appropriately selfish. But you can't see these qualities because you've exiled them to maintain the persona. Think about the qualities you're absolutely certain you don't have. I'm not an angry person. I'm not selfish. I'm not manipulative. These absolute denials are usually evidence of shadow, qualities you have but can't admit because they contradict your persona. The first step in changing how you see yourself is admitting, the person I think I am is not who I actually am. It's a constructed persona built from acceptable qualities, and it's incomplete. My actual self includes everything I've been denying as not me. Until I recognize this, I can't see myself accurately. This recognition is devastating. Your entire identity is revealed as a construction. Everything you've believed about yourself, your defining characteristics, your core personality, it's not your true self. It's a mask you built and forgot you were wearing. But this devastation is necessary. Because you can't change how you see yourself until you recognize that what you've been seeing isn't actually yourself. It's just the persona, and the persona is the obstacle to seeing your real self. Once you recognize the persona for what it is, you're ready for the more difficult work. Jung's second step reveals why self-improvement fails. You can't change how you see yourself while rejecting half of what you are. Real transformation requires integrating your shadow, all the qualities you've exiled as unacceptable, and recognizing them as essential parts of your wholeness, not defects that need fixing. Your shadow contains everything you've decided you're not, every quality you judge in others, every characteristic you can't admit about yourself, every desire you've deemed inappropriate, every emotion you've labeled as bad. All of it lives in the unconscious shadow, operating outside your awareness. Most people try to fight their shadow. They notice shadow qualities emerging and immediately repress them. I felt jealous. That's terrible. I need to be more grateful. I felt angry. That's wrong. I should be more peaceful. I felt selfish. That's bad. I need to be more giving. They're at war with their own wholeness, trying to eliminate half of what they are. But Jung discovered, fighting shadow makes it stronger. The more you repress, the more powerfully it operates unconsciously. Your repressed anger becomes passive aggression. Your denied selfishness becomes covert manipulation. Your rejected jealousy becomes comparison and resentment. The shadow doesn't disappear when you repress it. It just expresses unconsciously while you remain blind to it. Real transformation requires the opposite of fighting shadow. It requires integration. This means recognize the shadow qualities you've been denying, admit they're part of you, and consciously accept them as essential aspects of your wholeness. Think about a quality you absolutely reject about yourself. Maybe it's cruelty. You're certain you're not cruel. You're a kind person. But Jung would ask, have you never enjoyed someone suffering who you felt deserved it? Never felt satisfaction when someone who wronged you experienced consequences? Never withheld kindness from someone as punishment? That's cruelty. You have it. You've just been calling it something else. Justice, boundaries, discernment, to avoid admitting its cruelty. Integration means admit it. I have cruelty. I'm capable of enjoying others' suffering under certain conditions. This is part of me, not with shame, not with self-judgment, just with honest recognition. Yes, I contain this quality I've been denying. This is terrifying because it destroys the persona. You've built your identity on being kind, not cruel. Admitting cruelty means admitting the persona is incomplete. You're not just the kind person you thought you were, you're also the cruel person you've been denying. But Jung would say, this admission is liberation. You stop fighting yourself. You stop exhausting yourself, trying to eliminate qualities that are part of your natural wholeness. You stop creating suffering by trying to be only half of what you actually are. Integration doesn't mean acting on every shadow quality. It means make the shadow conscious so you can choose how to express it rather than having it express unconsciously. Conscious cruelty becomes healthy ruthlessness when needed. Conscious selfishness becomes appropriate self-care. Conscious aggression becomes necessary assertiveness. When you integrate shadow instead of fighting it, you fundamentally change how you see yourself. You're no longer just the persona's acceptable qualities. You're whole, containing both light and dark, both acceptable and unacceptable, both what you've been showing and what you've been hiding. But integration alone doesn't complete the transformation. There's something even deeper you must recognize. Jung's third step changes everything. You're not your thoughts, your emotions, your experiences, or even your personality. You're the consciousness that witnesses all of these. And until you shift identification from the contents of consciousness to consciousness itself, you can't see yourself accurately. Most people are completely identified with their psychological contents. When you feel anxious, you say, I am anxious. When you think critically, you say, I am a critical person. When you experience depression, you say, I am depressed. You're identifying with the experience, believing the experience is who you are. But Jung discovered, you're not the experience. You're what's experiencing. Anxiety happens within your consciousness. You're not the anxiety. You're the consciousness aware of anxiety. Critical thoughts happen within your awareness. You're not the thoughts. You're the awareness witnessing thoughts. Depression happens within your psyche. You're not depression. You're what's aware of feeling depressed. This distinction seems subtle, but it completely changes how you see yourself. When you're identified with contents, you believe you are your anxiety, your thoughts, your depression. And you try to change yourself by changing these contents, becoming less anxious, thinking more positively, eliminating depression. But the contents keep changing, so you're constantly trying to fix yourself. But when you identify with consciousness itself, you recognize, these contents aren't me. They're experiences happening within me. I don't need to change them to change myself. I need to stop believing I am them. Jung called this disidentification, withdrawing identification from ego contents and resting in awareness itself. It's the recognition that you're not the character in the story. You're the consciousness observing the story unfold. Think about a characteristic you believe defines you. Maybe I'm an anxious person. Now ask, who is aware that anxiety is present? Who notices when anxiety increases or decreases? Who observes anxious thoughts arising? That awareness, the one noticing anxiety, is that anxious? Or is that awareness simply conscious of anxiety? The awareness isn't anxious. Awareness is never anxious, never depressed, never anything. It's just aware. And that awareness is what you actually are. Everything else, personality, emotions, thoughts, experiences, these are contents within awareness, not who you are. When you recognize this, you fundamentally change how you see yourself. You're no longer the person trying to fix their anxiety, improve their personality, or become someone better. You're the consciousness within which all these experiences happen. And consciousness doesn't need improvement. It's already complete. This doesn't mean you ignore psychological contents or pretend they don't matter. It means you stop identifying with them as yourself. You work with them. You integrate them. You develop healthier patterns. But you know these are experiences within you, not what you are. Jung emphasized this shift in identification is the foundation of individuation. You can't become your true self while you're identified with ego contents. You have to recognize yourself as the consciousness witnessing ego, not as ego itself. But even this recognition doesn't complete the transformation. There's still one more critical shift. If you're beginning to recognize that you're not who you thought you were, that the persona is constructed, that shadow is part of your wholeness, that your consciousness witnessing experiences rather than the experiences themselves, you're starting to change how you see yourself at the fundamental level Jung described. Before we explore the final 2 steps that complete this transformation, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery. Let's continue, because these final 2 steps reveal how to stabilize this new self-perception and live from your actual self rather than the false persona. Jung's 4th step contradicts everything self-improvement teaches. You don't need to become better, more evolved, or more complete. Your self is already whole, already complete, already perfect as it is. The only problem is that you can't see this wholeness because you're identified with the incomplete persona. Self-improvement operates on a fundamental assumption. You're not enough as you are. You need to be better, stronger, more successful, more enlightened, more evolved. There's an ideal version of yourself you should be working toward, and your current self is deficient compared to that ideal. This assumption creates endless suffering. You're constantly measuring yourself against an ideal and finding yourself lacking. You're always trying to fix, improve, transcend who you currently are. And no matter how much you improve, it's never enough because the ideal keeps moving. You're stuck in perpetual inadequacy. But Jung discovered something radical. The feeling of inadequacy comes from identifying with the persona, not from actually being inadequate. The persona is incomplete. It only contains the acceptable qualities while excluding the shadow. So, when you identify with persona, you feel incomplete because persona is incomplete. But your actual self isn't incomplete. It's whole. It contains everything, persona and shadow, light and dark, acceptable and unacceptable. The self is already the totality of who you are. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be fixed or improved. The transformation isn't becoming complete. It's recognizing you're already complete and you've been unable to see it because you're identified with the incomplete persona instead of the complete self. Think about all the ways you believe you're inadequate, not confident enough, not successful enough, not evolved enough, not healed enough. These inadequacies exist only in comparison to the persona's ideal image. But if you withdraw identification from persona and recognize your actual self, the inadequacies disappear. Your self isn't inadequate. It's complete as it is. This doesn't mean you stop growing or developing. It means you stop growing from inadequacy and start growing from wholeness. You're not fixing yourself because you're broken. You're developing yourself because development is your self's natural expression of its completeness. Jung called this recognizing the self, the shift from seeing yourself as the inadequate ego trying to become complete, to recognizing yourself as the already complete self that ego exists within. This recognition fundamentally changes how you see yourself. You're not a deficient person needing improvement. You're a whole being naturally expressing its wholeness through development. When you recognize yourself as already complete, you stop the exhausting war against yourself. You stop trying to eliminate parts of yourself. You stop measuring yourself against impossible ideals. You accept yourself as you are, not with resignation, but with recognition that what you are is already whole. But recognition alone isn't enough. There's one final step that brings this new self-perception into daily life. Jung's final step is where transformation becomes real. You must begin living from your actual self rather than from the constructed persona. This means making choices from your wholeness, not from what you think you should be. Expressing your authentic nature, not the acceptable image. Acting from self-knowledge, not from ego defense. Living from persona means you make decisions based on maintaining your persona identity. You ask, what would the person I think I am do? And you do that, even when it contradicts what you actually want. You present the acceptable image even when it requires suppressing your authentic response. You perform your persona identity instead of expressing your actual self. This creates exhausting inauthenticity. You're constantly monitoring yourself, making sure you're being the person you're supposed to be. You can't relax into who you actually are because you're busy performing who you think you should be. And everyone in your life knows the persona, not you, so you feel unseen, unknown, disconnected even in close relationships. Living from self means you make choices from your wholeness, including shadow. You don't just ask, what would the kind person do? You also ask, what does my anger want? What does my selfishness need? What does my shadow require? And you integrate all of it into your choice, not just the acceptable parts. This terrifies most people. They think living from self means becoming selfish, cruel, uncontrolled. But Jung discovered, when you consciously integrate shadow, it expresses in healthy ways. Conscious anger becomes appropriate boundaries. Conscious selfishness becomes necessary self-care. Conscious cruelty becomes healthy ruthlessness when protection is required. It's unconscious shadow that expresses destructively. When you repress anger, it becomes passive aggression and sabotage. When you deny selfishness, it becomes covert manipulation. When you reject cruelty, it becomes unconscious harm justified as something else. Living from persona while denying shadow doesn't make you good. It makes your shadow unconscious and therefore more destructive. Living from self means you stop performing acceptability and start expressing authenticity. You say what you actually think, not what maintains your image. You do what actually serves you, not what makes you look selfless. You express your actual feelings, not just the appropriate ones. You become who you actually are in each moment, not who you've decided you should be. This will change your relationships. People who are attached to your persona will be confused or upset. You've changed. You're not yourself anymore. But you'll know, I wasn't myself before. I was performing a persona. Now I'm actually being myself for the first time. And new connections will form with people who relate to your actual self, not your persona. These relationships will feel deeper, more real, more energizing, because they're based on authentic connection, not persona performance. Jung emphasized, individuation isn't complete until you're living from self in daily life. You can recognize persona, integrate shadow, disidentify from contents. Know you're complete, but if you're still performing persona in your actual life, the transformation isn't real yet. You have to bring it into action. Living from self is a daily practice. Every choice is an opportunity. Am I choosing from persona or from self? Am I maintaining my image or expressing my wholeness? Am I performing who I should be or being who I am? The more you choose self over persona, the more your life transforms into authentic expression of your actual nature. Let me bring these 5 steps together to fundamentally change how you see yourself, according to Jung. First, recognize you're not who you think you are. The persona is a construction, not your true self. Second, integrate your shadow instead of fighting it. Those rejected qualities are part of your wholeness, not defects to eliminate. Third, stop identifying with your experiences. You're the consciousness witnessing thoughts and emotions, not the contents themselves. Fourth, recognize yourself is already complete. You're not inadequate. You just can't see your wholeness while identified with the incomplete persona. Fifth, live from self, not from persona. Make choices from wholeness. Express authenticity. Be who you actually are instead of performing who you should be. This isn't self-improvement, it's self-recognition. You're not becoming someone different or better. You're seeing yourself accurately for the first time, as the complete, whole self you've always been, but couldn't see through the distortion of persona identification. Jung would say, the person suffering, feeling inadequate, trying to fix themselves, that's the persona struggling. Your actual self isn't suffering. It's whole, complete, already perfect as it is. The transformation is withdrawing identification from the suffering persona and recognizing yourself as the complete self that persona exists within. If you want to fundamentally change how you see yourself, Jung would tell you, stop trying to improve who you think you are. Start seeing who you actually are. Recognize the persona as a construction. Integrate the shadow you've been rejecting. Disidentify from ego contents and recognize yourself as consciousness itself. Know that yourself is already complete, and begin living from that wholeness instead of performing the persona. This transformation isn't comfortable. Recognizing persona is constructed destroys your identity. Integrating shadow means admitting you're not who you thought you were. Disidentifying from contents creates groundlessness. Recognizing completeness removes your motivation for constant self-improvement. Living from self will change all your relationships. But this discomfort is the death of the false self that's been creating your suffering. The persona isn't you, and seeing yourself as persona is what's been making you feel inadequate, incomplete, unacceptable. Your actual self is whole, complete, already perfect. You just can't see it while you're identified with the persona. Stop improving the false self. Start seeing your true self. That's how you fundamentally change how you see yourself. That's Jung's path. That's individuation. If you're ready to see yourself as you actually are instead of who you think you should be, subscribe to this channel. Join thousands using Jung's wisdom to move from persona to self. To dive even deeper into Jung's revolutionary psychology and what it means for your spiritual awakening, click the recommended video on your screen now.